Next, we move on to specification number 2, which asks us to identify and draw the anthers and stigmas of a wind-pollinated flower. So now, we will examine the structure of a wind-pollinated flower closely, learn to identify its key parts like the anther, filament, and stigma, and understand how to draw its structure accurately. As you can see here, the image shows the inflorescence of a grass, which is a wind-pollinated flower. The main structures visible include feathery stigmas that catch pollen carried by the wind, long slender filaments with anthers that release pollen into the air, and the spikelet arrangement typical of grasses in the Poaceae family. Wind-pollinated flowers, like grasses, have special adaptations for this type of pollination. The flower head is an inflorescence composed of many small florets arranged in spikelets along a central stalk, and it lacks colorful petals or nectar since attracting insects is unnecessary. The stigmas are large and feathery, which helps them trap airborne pollen efficiently. The anthers, supported by long, flexible filaments, hang outside the flower and sway in the wind to release pollen. These lightweight pollen grains are easily carried by air currents, and the exposed, hanging anthers maximize dispersal for successful fertilization. So, we can conclude that the wind-pollinated flower is adapted to use the wind for pollination. And it has a very simple structure. Instead of bright petals to attract insects, it has small, simple flowers arranged in spikelets on a central stalk. The stigma is feathery and large so it can catch pollen floating in the air. The anthers, which make pollen, hang on long, thin filaments so they can sway in the wind and release pollen easily. The pollen itself is very light, which helps it travel through the air to reach other flowers. This is how everything in the flower's structure is designed to make wind pollination effective without needing insects. Therefore, in order to draw the floral structures like the anther and stigma neatly, start by carefully observing the reference image to understand the shapes and relative positions of each part. Begin with light pencil lines to outline the general structure before adding details and darker lines. Pay attention to proportions, making sure the anther sits correctly on top of the filament and the stigma is positioned at the tip of the pistil or carpel. For the stamen, which is the male reproductive organ, draw the filament as a thin stalk that supports the anther. The anther usually has 2 lobes, so sketch it as 2 oval-like sacs side by side. You can lightly indicate the internal pollen sacs if you want to show a cross-section. For the stigma, which is the female part, place it at the top of the style. Its shape can vary, but in wind-pollinated flowers it often looks feathery or rough-edged to catch pollen. Draw it as a slightly irregular or branched structure and add subtle texture to suggest its sticky surface. This feathery design helps trap pollen effectively. Now look at another example of a wind-pollinated flower. These flowers do not rely on insects or animals to transfer pollen, so they have special features to catch pollen carried by the wind. The stigma is large and feathery, which increases its surface area and helps trap tiny pollen grains floating in the air. The filaments are long and thin, holding the anthers so they hang outside the flower and can shake easily in the wind. The anthers are loosely attached, allowing them to swing and release pollen even with a slight breeze. Instead of bright petals, these flowers have small, leaf-like structures called bracts, because wind does not respond to color or scent. This helps the plant save energy by not producing showy petals or nectar. In short, wind-pollinated flowers have small or dull petals, no scent or nectar, large feathery stigmas, long hanging stamens, and produce lots of light, smooth pollen. In comparison, insect-pollinated flowers have large, colorful petals, often produce nectar and scent, smaller sticky stigmas, shorter stamens, and fewer pollen grains that are sticky or spiky. Similarly, here you can see a diagram of this flower, highlighting its male and female reproductive parts. To draw this diagram, start with the main outline by sketching the basic shape of the flower, including the stem and the leaf-like bracts at the base. Next, add the reproductive organs, draw the central female part, the pistil or carpel, with its feathery stigma on top, and then add the male parts, the stamens, with long filaments and loosely attached anthers. After that, add details to make the structures clear. Make sure the stigma looks feathery and the anthers are properly positioned on the filaments. Finally, label the parts using the image as a guide, marking the bract, feathery stigma, long filament, and anther correctly. This method provides a clear and simple way to represent the structure of the flower in a diagram.